Okay everyone, before I get started with this tutorial, I just wanted to let you know that in the description below there are links. Links to download and buy the software, and then there's a link for HDR Software review, and that's for if in case you didn't like Aurora or it didn't work out for you because maybe you don't have a Mac, you're using a Windows system. I have a link to 20 HDR software that I looked into. And then there's another link for free presets for Aurora that you can use and play around with. Also, if you wanted to buy Aurora, you can use the coupon code Captain Kimo, and that's all one word. Captain Kimo, Kimo spelled K-I-M-O, and you can save 10%. And I believe the coupon code also works with promotional sales too. So with that said, let's get started. Hey everybody, Captain Kimo here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use Aurora HDR software for Mac. Now I've only been using Aurora for since beginning of this year, so I haven't really used it that much, but I think I know enough to finally start doing a video on it, just to kind of show you my workflow and how I use it for my my HDR images. Now let's get started. Right now I have Lightroom open, and that's usually where I start from in Aurora. I don't take the photo and import it into Aurora. I start from Lightroom, and what I do is I adjust the so here's the photo we're going to be working on here, and what I do is I adjust the exposure before I export it out into Aurora HDR. So quick look at the exposures we'll be using. Here is the overexposed image. And I shot this with my Samsung NX500 with a Rokinon, I believe a Rokinon 14mm lens, and that is a manual lens, so that's why you don't see an f-stop here in my my settings here. And this would be the underexposed image. This is the evenly exposed image, and the Samsung, what it does is it shoots the overexposed image first, so that's why the overexposed image is at the beginning. So this is the overexposed, the evenly exposed, the 0 EV exposure. This is just the regular exposed image, and this is the underexposed image. Each one is done by 2 stops, and that's basically my go-to settings for HDR. 3 exposures, 2 stops apart. So when I start to process my my photo, I start with the 0 EV image. So let's go ahead and click that, and then what we'll do is the first thing I do is I just kind of hit auto in the develop module. I'll go ahead and just hit auto just to see what Lightroom does, and that looks good for this photo. I'd like to see maybe some of the shadows there, and maybe bring down some of the highlights up here. So let's bring down the highlights. So the reason I'm doing this is just so that I get a better exposed image, so that when I do merge it into Aurora, that I don't have to do more work than I need to in the HDR software. So I actually do have a example of what it looks like without the without adjustments made. So this is HDR image already merged in Aurora, and this is without the adjustments made in Lightroom first. And then this is the HDR image, produced in Aurora. These 2 photos didn't have any adjustments, and this one was adjustments made in Lightroom before going into Aurora. So look how sharp, how more or better exposed it looks. So that's without adjustments in Lightroom, and this is with adjustments in Lightroom. So let's go back and make the final adjustments in the exposures here that we're using. So I'm just gonna what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to hit the Apple button on a Mac here with Lightroom, so you can select the other exposures. I believe it's option on the Windows. I forgot, so you're gonna have to look that one up or shift. It might be shift to select more than one exposure. So what we're gonna do is we're going to sync this together. What this does is the settings that we applied to the 0 EV image, it will synchronize the exposure to the underexposed image and to the overexposed image. So here's just a quick look at the overexposed image before the adjustment. So I'm just going to hit the bracket key here, and then this is before, and then this is after. So that's what it looks like with the adjustments made. So now we're ready to go ahead into Aurora, and what I will do is I will right click and go into export, and in our export settings we have Aurora HDR Photo or Aurora HDR Pro, and I just use the TIFF with Lightroom adjusters. So I'll click that, and then it'll start processing the file. It'll create a TIFF file out of the 3 exposures. It'll take that TIFF file, merge them together in Aurora, and then we'll have an option soon that'll pop up. Here it is, and this window here is the Aurora window that allows us to align the image, check ghosting if we have any movement in our exposures, and chromatic aberration reduction. Now I'm not going to check any of these, but it does do a good job alignment, ghosting, and removing the chromatic aberration. With alignment, does a good job also. I'm not checking it because it was a very non-windy day, and I was on a tripod, and I had a wired controller with me, so everything was working just fine. Or nothing, I'm pretty sure nothing was out of alignment. So let's go ahead and click the create the HDR image. Okay, so here's our HDR image completely merged in Aurora HDR, and this is what it looks like already with default settings, not a lot of adjustments made, and it looks pretty good. It looks very good actually. And I can just show you real fast some of the presets I have. Here is Beach Dream, one of my presets. I'm going to click on it, and it'll pop up the preview here in a few seconds. And that looks very dreamy, but for me it's too yellow, too warm. So there's another preset here that I'll just show you real fast, and this is City Lights. I actually like this preset the best, and if I wasn't doing this tutorial, this is the preset I would just use and hit the apply button and go back into Lightroom. But I'm gonna go ahead and reset everything, and then we're gonna cover all the settings. So I'm gonna go ahead and reset the settings by clicking here, and this actually goes back to 0. All the settings is back to 0. And then what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and go through the settings that I use. I'm not gonna cover any of the things here that I don't use. So what I do first in Aurora is I go right to the tone curve to kind of play with the contrast, and that looks pretty good. But you know what, I'm gonna kind of go into the colors because I do like it cooler from that preset here, the City Lights preset. So we're gonna go ahead and make it cooler, and that looks good right about there. And then we're just gonna play with the color here, up the saturation, the vibrance, maybe boost the saturation up some, boost the vibrance up a little more, and then boost the color contrast some also, just to give it a little extra pop. And that looks pretty good. What we're gonna do is I am going to do the before after. This little eyeball up here, if you click it, this is what it looks before any adjustments, and this is after. So it's starting to look really good. I like it almost as is, but I'm gonna go over some of the more settings, or some of the other settings. So I'm just gonna keep going here. Radiance is another setting that I use also, and just so that you know, I have it set for in the view mode here. It's single view mode, so that every time I use another setting, it just closes the other one. And I like this mode better because it's easier to locate all the settings that I need to adjust versus the other way. Let's turn the single view mode off, and then you can see how it can get daunting here, trying to find the setting that you need. So I go into view mode and I will do the single view mode, so it just closes, so then you just know which one you have to click to make the adjustments. So with that said, let's go ahead and keep going with this. With this particular photo, I will want to probably add a little image radiance to it, just to give it a softer look, not too grungy, and just a little bit will be perfect for this image. Now I'll just pull it all the way to the right, just so that you can see the effect that it does, and it's very dreamy, and it looks very, very cool. But for my use, I'm gonna bring it back down, just so that it looks a little more natural. So right about there, 10, 12, it's perfect. And then you can play around with the other settings. Here you have smoothness, and then you have brightness, and then you have smart colorize. So there's more settings under just that, but that right now looks perfect. So I'm just going to close this. Then we're going to go to the maybe the next color we already played with, details. I don't really play with the details, so I'm just going to close that. Glow, I don't play with that as much, so I'm not gonna, well, I can play around with it just to show you. So we'll hit the glow, and you can see how it just kind of glows a little bit. So I'll just close that. Then we'll go into something that I use and I like is the top and bottom lighting. This is something that I do use a lot. And what this does is this affects the lighting on the top of your image and the bottom of your image. And this is fantastic that Aurora has this, because a lot of what I need to do is either top or bottom exposure adjustments. So that works out very well for what I need. So let's go ahead and bring it back. Maybe reset it. And I did like the bottom maybe just a little brighter, and the top is fine, so we'll leave that as is. You can also adjust the blending of top and bottom, but for this one we'll just leave it right about there. And then you can also adjust the orientation. So we're going to bring it up a little bit here, just kind of where the horizon is, and the rotation of the top and bottom. So, and that's good for that. I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. And then we have tone curve, and we played with that. So I'm not going to go cover this. Filters. This is something I use also, and it helps because I use this in Photoshop and in Lightroom a lot. And what it does is it isolates the colors. So if you want more saturation in the blues, we can do that by bringing that up. You can see the blues are getting more saturated. And then let's see, we can play with the yellows and the reds, and this will affect the this affects the overall color of the image, because it's very yellow, so I'm not gonna play around with that. Reds I can play around with. It should just affect some of the areas, but it seems to be affecting all of it, so I'm not gonna play around with that either. I'm just gonna go ahead and type it back to 0. And then we can go into luminosity, and this adjusts the brightness and the darkness of each color. So for instance, with this photo, I will probably want to bring down the blues some, just to give it a richer tone in the sky there, and that looks nice. And then we will bring up the greens, kind of make the green a little brighter, and that looks pretty good too. So I'm going to close that out, and then we'll go into the next one. This is color toning. This is more for artsy stuff. I only use it again for just maybe the artsy stuff. So I might just apply something just to show you what it looks like. So there's the first color, the second batch of colors, third, fourth, and fifth. You can see how it has this very artsy, very film look to it, and I'm not gonna apply any of that into this photo. I'm just gonna go ahead and hit the reset. But you can play around with it. You might like it. I do like it for more of my my creative work. So we'll go ahead and close that, and then we'll go into Vignette. Now Vignette will give you the vignette effect. So I'm just gonna increase it, and you can see the vignette effect here, which is awesome because then I don't have to create it in Lightroom or in Photoshop. Not like it's hard to do in Lightroom, but in Photoshop it might be a little, a little difficult in Photoshop to do. But I'm just gonna leave that alone because I use Lightroom for that, and I like it better there. So we'll go into layers. Now layers is where you play around with the effect that you just did on this all these settings. So let's say you want it back to the original. You can go to 0. This is the original, or you can go back, or you can go right in between. But I like it right at 100% there, so I'm going to close that. Now something else that I like to do here is I like to play with layers, and Aurora has a great feature where you can just keep adding layers. Layers is a way of affecting certain areas. It's a great way of, let's say you wanted to use another preset. We'll do the beach dream because that's very intense. And then let's say we only want to affect the sky. Well, with the layers we can do that because now we can go ahead and click this little brush tool, and then we can just paint in the sky. So now only the sky is affected with that preset. So that actually looks pretty good. So let's take a look real fast. So that's before, and that's after, and that actually looks good. So I'm just gonna leave it like that. But let's see, I might bring down the opacity some, and that's the awesome thing about layers in Aurora too. You can adjust the opacity here. So I'll have it here. Let's go all the way down, and then we'll bring it up a tad. Starting to look better, and right about there looks good. So we'll leave it right about 59, 60, which is perfect. So with that said, I can add some other things, add more layers if I wanted to. Here's a trick I do. Sometimes when you're doing HDR, the image looks very flat, and that's because you're trying to get the full dynamic range. And what I'll do is I'll add another layer, and then I'll go into this source image here, and I'll add a source image to this photo, and that's the so you have 3 options, which is the overexposed, the underexposed, and the 0 EV image. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click the 0 EV, and that will load up the just a regular exposure. So this is the irregular exposure right here. And if we click on this is our HDR image, and this is the regular exposure. So the regular exposure has, to me, has better contrast because it's just a regular exposure, whereas the HDR image is a tad flat, but because we made the adjustments, it looks much better. So we might want to, let's say, merge the regular exposure or blend it in with the HDR image. So a good way of doing this is with the opacity. So I can bring down my opacity, and then you can also change the mode, the transparency mode here. For this, I usually like using luminosity for this purpose. And then you can see the this is the adjustments made. This is 0, so let's go ahead and just kind of bring it up. So this will make it really deep, very contrasty. It almost makes it too vibrant. You can see how vibrant it is, but it brings back the natural look to the image. So let's go ahead and just play around with it, and I think right about there, 27% looks good. So let's do this. This is before, and then this is after. It just makes it look a little more natural, like the original image. But this is all preference, so it's up to you whether you want to use this technique or not. but it's there. There's an option there for you to bring back the original exposure and blend it together. So, and that's pretty much all the settings. This will get you running with about 95% of what you can do with Aurora. I'll produce some more videos later on some of the other things that I use, but for now I think this will get you going. You can also save this preset if you wanted to save this by just clicking here, and or well, it's supposed to be able to just click here, but I'm not quite sure why it's giving me no parameters are changed. Oh, that's because of this here. So if I wanted to save the preset, this will be the main adjustments. We can save it by clicking here, and this will give us a name, and we can just name it Sunset Colors, and then it'll create the preset. And if you wanted to load the preset, what you will do is you'll go into, I believe it is in here, but what you will need to do is, yes, what you'll need to do is just launch Aurora, and I believe you go into File, and it'll have load presets in File. So to load the presets, you can't have an image up. You'll have to actually just open Aurora and load it by going to File, and I believe there's another setting to load presets right here. So that covers that, and I think that's it for this. I will just I like it the way it is, so I'll just hit apply, and then what it does is it'll you know, apply the settings, apply everything that we did to the image, and then it will take it into photo, or take it back into Lightroom. But I'm not sure if it will apply the settings up here I have, because I have that invisible. So let's see what it does. We'll take it back into Lightroom, and yeah, it looks like it applied the settings from the from the other two layers that we used, and I know because this up here is the sky, and it's got a very dreamy look to it, so I know it applied it. So this is what it looks like in Lightroom. I might adjust it a little bit more in Lightroom. I might find that this is maybe a little too warm down here, so I will maybe bring the gradient tool and just kind of pull it up to here, and then bring the temperature up to something a little cooler. So that's a little cooler than what it originally was. And then right around here it's a little warm. In particular right here is a little warm, but again, this is just my preference, my taste, and I might want to just do a little gradient with the radial tool, the circle tool, and maybe bring the color a little cooler, maybe a little greener. So that looks good there. And like I said, Lightroom has the vignette feature, and I like to use that in Lightroom because it's just faster. So I'll play around with that just to kind of draw the eye into the photo a little bit, and that looks good. Maybe bring some sharpness, reduce some noise here, and voila, this is looking perfect. So that'll be the end of the tutorial. Until next time, I'll work on another tutorial, maybe something a little different, just kind of show you more of the settings in Aurora, and that's it.